Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for having me here today to talk about my least favorite subject in the entire world. It's nice to be in touch with everybody. Obviously, it's been an extremely interrupted year, so we haven't been able to travel and see each other very much and to figure out what practically everything around Brexit means. But we're going to dig into a lot of it today. I can imagine that there will be lots of questions that come up. So as Lovisa said, please feel free to just pop them in the chat as we're going through the presentation, and we'll try to get to everything at the end when we're running through some questions. But I'm just going to start off with a sort of general introduction to where the UK is at the minute. So we officially left the European Union on the 31st of December, meaning that as of the 1st of January this year, we are operating as a third country outside of the EU. I've got here that the EU defines a third country as one that's not a member of the European Union, as well as a country or territory whose citizens do not enjoy the European Union right to free movement. The free movement thing is a hugely important part of what we're going to be discussing today. Obviously, borders are one of the biggest parts of the Brexit conversation, not just in a movement of people kind of way, but also in a movement of goods and information. So we'll get into all of that. But yeah, I just wanted to start this off by saying that although a deal has been done, there are still many parts of it that are up in the air. There are many parts that the Musicians Union and various different unions in the UK and throughout Europe are addressing and trying to work on at the minute. So what I have to say today is as things currently stand, but there are still lots of questions up in the air and lots of things being worked on. So that's the Brexit side of thing, and I can't really go much further without mentioning the COVID side of things as well, because obviously we thought stepping into 2020 that Brexit was going to be the biggest issue that we were dealing with. And then in March, so a year ago, the entire live industry had to shut down. So it's just about a year since that happened. Yeah, the situation is starting to look a little bit more positive in the UK, which is great. We've just surpassed 20 million first dose vaccinations, which means that we are on a timeline. The UK government has spelled out a timeline to start easing some of the restrictions that we have in place at the moment, which means that hopefully by June, the government has told us by June, we'll be able to run events again. So the industry is now sort of recharging itself and pulling itself back together to be able to stage our first events as of June this year. Obviously, the borders may not be open by that point, but I just wanted to let you all know that that's the timeline that the UK is currently working to. So hopefully by the autumn time, and hopefully certainly by early 2021, we'll be able to be inviting bands across the borders and putting these Brexit rules to the test and seeing what's going on. So I'm gonna just put my screen on here for you. So I can show you this presentation that I've got going. Can you see that okay? And then loading.
Yeah, now we can see it.
Perfect, okay. Right then, so I decided to put UK as the biggest word on this instead of Brexit, because I'd like this to be quite a positive conversation about the things that can happen with Brexit going on, rather than the massive restrictions that are now in place. So these are the things that I'm going to touch upon today. So we've just had a chat about the current status of live music. As I mentioned, we're going to be kicking things off again in the summertime, hopefully. So I'm going to now start talking about the visa and the entry requirements. And I think this is going to be the biggest part of what I discuss today, because this is where the biggest change lies. I'm going to have a look at the touring requirements as well. So what you're going to need to get equipment across the borders and some of the different considerations that you might need around insurance and things like that moving forward. And then we're going to have a look at merchandise, VAT, and copyright as well. And I'm going to say now that these are not my specialist areas. So I'm just going to put I'm going to give you the very kind of top line of what's going on in an overview. And then at the end of the session, I've got a list of resources that I've prepared, which links through to the UK government's advice around VAT across borders, customs declarations, things like that, and some talks from the Music Publishers Association around copyright. So I'll be able to put you in front of people that are quite clued up on the current situation and what's going on. So let's get to it. So traveling to the UK. First of all, I'd like to say that you will be very, very welcome to come to the UK, and we really want you to come and visit us. Please don't let all of the negativity around Brexit put you off coming to approach the UK music industry. Although the live industry has obviously had its struggles over the past year, there will still be a lot of space for Finnish artists to come and perform and to work on the recorded side of things too. The only thing is it's going to be slightly different to get across the borders. So what we were hoping and what was being discussed between the UK government and the EU was to put some kind of EU-wide touring visa in place. When the deal was shared and announced in January, this wasn't something that was included in there, but this is something that we are strongly lobbying for. All of the musicians unions within the UK and throughout Europe realize that if we have to negotiate borders, if UK artists have to negotiate borders in every single EU member state, then it's going to be a very long and difficult process to tour. But on the reciprocal side of that, we understand that that's going to make it really difficult for artists to come into the UK and make that part of their touring patterns. So that's something that we're really working on. But for the moment, it's not in place. So we have to look at the current visa and work permit system that we have. Entry requirements for these visas and work permits are very much dependent on what you're going to be doing, and specifically whether or not that activity is going to be paid when you're in the UK, and the duration of the stay. And for basically anybody coming into the UK now, there are different rules. I'll go into sort of this if you just want to come as a visitor and things like that in a few minutes, but this link that I've put on here, I will also share in the resources document at the end, but this is basically just a click through form on the UK government website so that you can check whether or not you need a visa for the activities that you're going to be undertaking in the UK. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through some of the visas that we have available at the minute. And the first one is the Tier 5 Creative or Sporting Worker visa. This is probably the most recognized. This is the one that's the most long-standing in the UK, and it's the one that Customs and Borders officials are the most familiar with. So if you are to rock up to the UK border with a Tier 5 visa, it should be a fairly straightforward process because there are a lot of them out there, and it's a very common practice to enter the UK with this. This is a 12-month visa, and you need to have sponsorship from a licensed employer. So the person that's giving you the sponsorship needs to be licensed with the UK government as a sponsor. It takes around it doesn't take 3 months for it to be processed. You get decisions in around about 3 weeks, but you can start applying for this 3 months before the date that you'd first need it. And we do recommend, and I say we as Brits wanting to welcome people into the country, we would recommend that you do this as early as you possibly can at the moment. With the COVID situation, obviously the borders have been really, really restricted. So we haven't been able to test out getting musicians over the borders, what issues they might confront and come across. So it's heavily, heavily advised at the moment to give yourself plenty of time and to be very cautious, just to get all of the paperwork that I'm going to talk about in place just in case. We might see that in a year's time, when we've had festival season, we've had thousands of musicians crossing borders, that some of these processes don't need to take place. Some of them will be faster, some of them will have been modified. But as we're figuring it out, it's best not to take any risks. So please do take your time, seek advice. There's lots of services out there that will help you to get a visa in place and make sure that you have all of the relevant paperwork when you get to the border. Yeah, so those comments go for everything that I'm about to say now, but back to the Tier 5 visa. This one, so it lasts for 12 months and it costs about £244. This is good if you've got like a long running campaign going on and you're going to need to come to and from the UK. This is also good if you have continuous employment in the UK. This one will work. But yeah, if you're going to be in and out of the UK for songwriting sessions, if you've got like multiple tours and live events that are going to be taking place throughout the year, then it is worth considering a Tier 5 visa. Yeah. And as I said, this is a really recognized type of visa, so it's one of the safer options that we have at the minute. But one that I feel is going to become more and more popular is this one. This is the permitted paid engagement visa. So it's for anyone over the age of 18. It's to undertake specific paid work. So if you're coming to the UK for one tour, then this would be an interesting option to go for. It lasts 1 month. It's much cheaper than the Tier 5 visa. It costs £95. This isn't quite as recognized by border officials though. So this is why if you speak to a visa company, they'll probably throw the Tier 5 visa in front of you first. It's not quite as recognized, it's much newer, but it seems to suit a lot more of the necessities that artists will have over the coming years. So I can see that this one will become more and more important. There's a few caveats that come along with any visa, such as you have to have sufficient funds to maintain and accommodate yourself during a visit. This basically means that you might need to provide some evidence of income at the border. You will need to be invited by a UK-based organisation or client, so you'll need to have a letter of invitation available. So with this visa, there's a lot more paperwork. You're going to have a little folder with you when you get to the border, and you will have to declare yourself to a border agent when you get to the UK as well, to talk through what it is that you're going to be doing and to make sure that you get the correct stamps in your passport to be able to stay for the full month that you have on the visa. Yeah, when this one finishes, you absolutely have to leave the UK. This is, as I was sort of looking into the new rules around this was very strictly stated that this is a 1-month visa and it can't be extended while you're in the UK. So that's very important to bear in mind. And with each of the visa types that I'm chatting about, I've put a link on the bottom, but I will send these all around separately. But you can see the exact ins and outs of everything that you'd need to do for each visa. So please do check them out and make sure that you are taking on a visa that is going to suit your purposes and it's going to allow you to get paid for the work that you're doing in the UK. Another thing that's important to note with this visa is that you have to work specifically on what you've come to the UK to do. So you can't come to the UK on tour and then get a job in a bar for a month to cover some costs. You can only come and act as the professional that you've been listed on your visa, the professional work that you've been listed to do. Another route into the UK is the permit-free festival. Now, it'd be wonderful if this list was hundreds of festivals long, but it's actually quite hard for a festival to be listed as a permit-free festival. However, if you are invited to perform by one of these festivals, then you can cross the border without needing a visa and you're able to be paid for the performance that you'll be doing. There are lots of restrictions around this, so it's absolutely worth looking into what's going on, and you could get into trouble with the festival that you're invited by if you do anything wrong while you're over. But you will be invited to perform at that particular festival, so that will be the permitted activity that you can do when you're in the UK. You can't then wander off on tour and head home afterwards. This is very much a single event entry. But as I mentioned, these are all absolutely registered with the government. There's some big festivals on there as well, you know, there's lots of different types. So there's lots of opportunities here for getting over into the UK. But as I mentioned, you can be paid for these. So it's a nice way to get over here if you're able to get the invitation in place. And again, there's lots of paperwork that you'd need to be able to prove to immigration officials that you've been invited and that you are the professional musician that is listed in your documents. So make sure that you have everything nice and ordered. Then there are a couple of others, but these three types that I'm going to talk you through now, these are for sort of longer stays in the UK. So if you're looking to relocate to the UK for a while, then these are the kind of visas that we'll be looking at. So we've got a skilled worker visa. So this is listed as for shortage occupations. So a good example that I heard of this is if an orchestra is missing a very particular player in the UK and there is an expert in that field in Finland, then the orchestra would be able to sponsor a tier 2 visa in order to get that specialist player to come over to the UK. So this is a very specific kind of visa, but it is available and hopefully will become more and more commonplace now that we have these systems in place where we need to prove people's talent in order to get them across borders. So skilled worker visa is one. Then the global talent visa is arguably the most difficult visa to get. It's an interesting one because you don't need to have work necessarily in the UK. You just need to be proven to be financially stable, as well as an exceptionally talented performer, artist, worker within your field in your home country. So this one takes a long time to process and you need a lot of paperwork to be able to prove that you can get this tier 1 visa. Again, if you're going for any of these kinds of visas, I would definitely recommend working with experts to be able to make sure that your application is looking as solid as it possibly can when it goes through to the government to decide whether or not you can get them. And then there's the points-based immigration system, which is, I've put problematic, but I should have written hated in the brackets afterwards, because this is the new system that the UK Home Office has put into place when it comes to allowing people to move to the UK. It's based very much on educational qualifications and not necessarily on talent, for example. So if you're a musician that has trained to an extremely high level in an educational institute and you have the paperwork to prove that, then you'll be in a good position. But if you are a self-trained musician that's been working in the industry for 20 years and you don't necessarily have the certificates of skill with your instrument or anything like that, then it's going to be a much more difficult process for you, which is very unfortunate, and it's not the way that this should be dealt with, but it's what is currently in place in the UK. So these are all longer term, they're more specialist and they're more expensive. Definitely work with somebody to get them in place. And I posted this link earlier, but I'm just sharing it again here. You can go to this link on the government website, the UK government website, and it will tell you whether or not you could look into applying for any of these particular visas and if it'd be important to do so. Okay. So when it comes to meetings and promotional activities, which I would imagine would be very relevant to a lot of the people on this call, these can be undertaken as a visitor. So you don't need a specific visa, you don't need special permissions in order to access events, conferences in the UK. You can come over for meetings, you can undertake contract negotiations. You can also, if you're a musician, under the visitor sort of umbrella, you're allowed to come over and perform for free. I'll come back to this in a second. You can undertake promotional activities as well. So you can come over for interviews, things like that. But no paid work can be undertaken if you're coming to the UK as a visitor. And the reason that I said that around free shows for artists is that if you are an artist and you're traveling to the UK on a plane with a guitar in a case and you get to the border and then you just say, I'm gonna play a few shows, but they're not going to be paid. Right now, that's not going to be a very easy conversation to have. Hopefully in a year's time, that will become very standard practice and it'll be easy for somebody to prove at the border that they're not taking on any paid work, they're just coming to the UK, they might play the guitar with their friends or whatever it is that they want to do. But at the minute, we just have to be as cautious as we possibly can be because we don't know who's going to get stopped and we don't know what are going to be acceptable things for customs officials to hear. So please do approach that side of things with caution. If you are coming to the UK and you're going to be doing a free show and you've been invited by a label or something like that, for example, to come and do some promotional shows, then just print off the paperwork and just make sure that you have something written down so that a customs official would have a little bit of evidence or proof and not just your word. Most standard visitors can spend up to 6 months in the UK. Again, you can't undertake any paid work while over here. So there are a few bits and pieces that you'd need to look into, even if you just want to come to the UK without a visa, just to double check that you can undertake all the activities that you want to. And there's a very handy link just underneath where you can find all of the ins and outs of what it is that you'd need to do. But I think I just want to say that I think it's really good news that we are able to have meetings and promotional activities without visas, because this was a big conversation before Christmas that everybody coming to do anything to do with the creative industries was going to need a tier 5 visa to get to the UK, but it's not the case. There are lots of things that you're able to do. So that is good news. Okay, so those are all of the ways that we can get people across the borders, and now we're going to have a quick chat about equipment. Carnets are going to be that word. If you work in the touring industry, then carnet is already a very regular part of your vocabulary anyway, but if it wasn't before, it will be now. So a carnet will be required to bring any equipment into the UK unless it's a personal portable musical instrument. Now, this links to what I just said a minute ago, and this is something that the Musicians Union have been lobbying for and have very recently had confirmation on. So we were worried that people would need a carnet just to transport one musical instrument across the border. That's not the case. We've had confirmation that a musician will be able to travel with a personal portable musical instrument. So that's something that you can carry onto public transport without having a carnet. So that's great news. That frees people up a little bit. Again, as I just mentioned, at the moment, if you turn up to a UK border and you've got an instrument with you, you will be faced with some questions as to what activities you're going to be undertaking in the UK. So do just make sure you've got any evidence with you that you can possibly provide. So these cost about £325 and they last for a year. They can be processed very quickly, like depending on which company you use, it can be around 48 hours. But again, don't just give yourself 48 hours if you've got 2 weeks to do this, give yourself plenty of time. And I'd also, just from my experience of tours, I would very much recommend that you're very organized with your carnet and that you put as much equipment on it as you can possibly envisage yourself bringing to the UK throughout the year. Once you've registered the carnet, you can't add any equipment to it. You can travel with less equipment, but you can't travel with more equipment than is on the carnet. You would need to buy another carnet. So that's something to be very mindful of. Yeah, check the small print again, and there's a link there to the London Chamber of Commerce, which is somebody that issues carnets. There's tons of information on that link, but also if you are part of a union, often unions have deals in place with different carnet companies. So do check with them to see if there's, if you can get a little bit of money off. I know that that's something that the Musicians Union in the UK have been working on a lot. But I would also just recommend that you be very organized with your gear. Because if you get to customs and they want to check that you absolutely have this one pedal that you've listed on your carnet, you need to know exactly where it is and be able to pull it out and present it to the customs official. So yeah, just be organized, take a little bit of time to do some inventory of what you've got. I will say that carnets they're based on equipment rather than individuals. So it's not necessarily the case that every single musician in a band will need a carnet. If you're traveling as a band, then you can just get one carnet as a band and list all of the band's instruments and equipment on that one carnet, but you will need to all travel together. So if you think about the carnet as the passport of your equipment, then everybody that needs to be there. So yeah, just make sure that if you've got 4 guitars and 4 musicians on there, that they're all traveling together, that you don't have 2 guitars and 2 musicians in a car and 2 on a plane, because then when you get to the borders, they're not going to know where the different instruments are and the different people are. So do be very mindful of that. If you're a musician in a band and you play with a lot of different bands and you're going to be traveling on different tours, then I would definitely recommend getting your own personal carnet for the year, just to give yourself the flexibility of being able to travel as and how you need to. And the last thing that I'm going to mention on this particular point is the CITES, the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. This is not something that I ever thought I'd have to consider, but these are instruments with protected properties such as ivory or rosewood. They were previously permitted by the EU to cross borders between the UK and mainland Europe. Now they're not. So you're going to need a certification of movement to be able to get protected instruments across the borders. To be honest, these kind of instruments are very specialist, so you are likely to have quite detailed insurance paperwork and certifications in place anyway. So I don't think that this will be a massive surprise to people that have ivory on their instruments. But it is just something to be aware of, that if this could get stopped at a border if you don't have the right paperwork in place. And some additional considerations, insurance. We do have the European health insurance card. So these will, I'm not sure how much these are used outside of the UK, but we've always had to have them. So these will be valid in the UK up until their expiry date. So if your EHIC card expires in 2023, then that's fine. You can keep using it until then. Afterwards, it's going to be replaced by a global health insurance card. So we'd recommend getting one of those to come across to the UK. It's going to be a very similar cost and process to getting the EHIC card. It's just going to be a G instead of an E. And then we get to insurance as well. So please, whenever traveling abroad generally, I guess, but especially now that you don't have the protections of the EU when approaching the UK, please do make sure to have relevant health, travel and gear insurance in place. Driving this was a big thing before we got the actual deal through, but this turned out to be something that we didn't have to worry about too much. If you have a Finnish driving license, then you will be able to use that driving license in the UK. You won't need to update it to anything different. But please do check that you have the right permits for any vehicle that you'd be bringing over, especially if we're talking about bigger tours and we get into the conversations around cabotage and haulage. Yeah, please do just check the weight of your vehicle and that you are able to cross the border with the amount of equipment that you have listed on your carnet, and that you've paid all of the relevant customs duties and the tax that you might need to. Again, before, in the old days, it would have been very easy to get across the border and to just say you're a band and you're coming on tour. But now there will be more checks. There will be a lot more paperwork that you need. So please do, as I mentioned earlier, print off your paperwork. Make sure that you have it in a nice folder, nice and organized, so that you can present it to whoever needs to see it. And if you have any questions about coming to the UK, about anything that you have to do, please check with your promoter or with your sponsor or with the orchestra that's invited you, because these questions are going to become more and more frequent. So they will have answers. They may have sort of individual deals with various unions, like I mentioned about carnets and things. So they might have some things in place where they're able to save you a little bit of money. And please check with an expert as well. If you're going to be doing anything a little bit more long-term or anything even slightly complicated, please do take the time to speak to an expert, just to make sure that you've covered yourself. And that you're not going to get into any kind of immigration trouble when you're in the UK. All right, how are we doing for time? Oh, okay. Right, so now we get to merchandise, VAT and customs. As I mentioned earlier, I am by no means a tax specialist, so I'm just going to tell you about a couple of things that have popped up already. I would imagine that if you're working on this kind of level, if you're working in merchandise crossing borders, if you're a label that is sending records across the borders, you'll have already come upon a couple of issues or a couple of differences that I'll mention in a second. So I doubt that this is going to be brand new news to you. But just to make you aware that if you are importing goods from the UK to Finland or vice versa, your company will need an EORI number for its customs transactions from now on. You will also need a VAT number if you've got goods crossing over the borders. So the EORI number is basically for merch and for goods. So you need to have this number for customs declarations, and VAT is for goods and services. So they are different, but they're also slightly linked. You will need a VAT number. You might not need an EORI number, but the other way around, if you have an EORI number, you will definitely need a VAT number. So it's definitely worth going to this link here, thule.fi. You don't have to look at it in English. I just copied what I saw, where you can apply for your EORI number. And they'll have some information there about its purpose and when you would need to use it and how to apply it as well. Then just to mention VAT on goods coming into the UK, because there's been a lot of stuff in the press recently about people trying to buy records and them getting stuck at borders, and then they have to pay a huge amount of VAT and customs duties to be able to collect them. So I've just found this quite simple example here, just to sort of underline some considerations that you would need to have when shipping goods over the borders. So if the consignment, that's the total order, which would likely include shipping, if it's less than £135 in value, then the liability is with the supplier to collect this VAT at the point of sale. If the supplier has done that, and then they've correctly completed either a CN22 or a CN23 customs form, then there shouldn't be any issues in sending that merchandise, those records, whatever it might be, across the borders, and them getting to the person that's bought them without having to pay any additional fees. I think this is where things have been tripping up a little bit. For orders worth more than £135, there is no liability with the EU seller to pay the VAT up front. So I think what has been happening recently is that maybe record shops, for example, have been putting in purchase orders with labels in the EU, which are more than £135. They haven't been charged VAT by the label or by the record supplier, and therefore we've had packages getting stuck at customs with customs duties that need to be paid. So it's just worth, if you are supplying any sort of UK suppliers with your records or with your merchandise, it's just worth having that conversation of when and where the VAT is going to be applied, to make sure that somebody is paying for it along the way and it's not disrupting incoming and outgoing stock and merch. And I think this is especially important if you're talking to or if you're dealing directly with fans as well, because it's quite a difficult thing if they've tried to buy a record from you and then all of a sudden they can't get hold of it and they have to pay loads more money. It's just good to be clear on the processes around this. So that's as much as I'm going to say on that side of things. And then I'm just going to mention some other VAT bits which have come up, such as if you're selling digital services from the EU to the UK, you need to register for and account for VAT. I've included this as an example of just the many different considerations that people need to have around VAT. It's a very complex issue and subject, and I think it's turned out to be far more complex than we had initially thought it would be, because this is where a lot of issues have occurred when it comes to crossing borders since January. This is why there are VAT experts in place, so please do speak to one if this is relevant to you in any way. But this isn't necessarily going to apply to people on this call today, but just to underline that UK businesses are no longer able to use VAT MOS system in the UK, and the current EU-wide VAT threshold for supplies of digital services to customers ceases to apply to UK businesses. So if you're working with website suppliers, servers, anything like that in the UK, then you may have to pay VAT moving forward. Every single situation around VAT is going to be different, so it's important to just speak to your partners and speak to your suppliers and make sure that, as I mentioned earlier, that these conversations are had so that you're not fronted with unexpected bills at any point. But as I keep underlining, please do speak to professionals just to make sure that you're not overpaying if you don't need to be, and that you're not being charged in any areas that you're not due. Another, and I think this is the final area that I'm going to touch on today, is copyright. Now, this is another thing that we were really concerned about ahead of Brexit happening. We were very worried that all of the negotiations and deals that have been put in place around copyright through the EU were going to fall to pieces and we were going to have to renegotiate absolutely everything. But I've included this quote here from PRS for Music, just to say that the UK's copyright law is very much mirrors what's been happening on a European level, and it's then made into national law. So what has happened is that even though we've stepped away from the EU and we're not covered by the same copyright laws as we were before, we've basically mirrored them in UK law, and we have very, very similar structures in place. There's a fairness decree around this as well. So if there is any kind of debate to be had around copyright, there's something called, we have these international treaty obligations, and we have these non-compete sort of treaties in place as well, so that we aren't going to be trying to completely outdo all of the other countries when it comes to percentages and ownership, and when it comes to copyright. It should be very much the same system that you're seeing in your home country. And again, copyright is so unique to the people that are dealing with it. Everybody has different deals in place, so please do speak to your home copyright royalty society and just make sure that if you have any deals in place that are pan-European, that you're speaking to your store or whoever it is that you're with, just to make sure that you are aware of who is paying what, who has ownership of what. One thing that might come up around this is withholding tax, which is what you see in the US. So in the US, I think they charge 30% withholding tax, which means that that's 30% of a royalty that's not received by a UK copyright agency, for example. So we are hoping that this isn't going to be something that we have to deal with very much, but this was a big concern before Brexit took place, and it's something that we're still really keeping a close eye on. But if you do have multi-territory deals in place, then withholding tax might become a bigger part of your day-to-day life than it was previously. So please, again, just speak to the people in the know, speak to your home collection society, and make sure that this conversation has been had, again, just to avoid any kind of unexpected losses in this case. What was next? Oh, yes, this is great. This is from the Musicians Union. Now, I keep talking about them today, but they've been doing such a phenomenal job around information for musicians around Brexit. They're obviously focused towards the UK, but everything that they're putting out there is reciprocal. So if you're a Finnish musician and you need a flow chart to make sure that you've checked out everything that you need to know to be able to access the UK, then the Musicians Union have got your back. So this is very nice and clear. Again, I've put a link to this in the document that I'll share afterwards, but it's just a checklist of what you need to make sure that you have in place. I haven't mentioned a valid passport yet. Hopefully that's quite obvious, but we are not going to be accepting EU ID cards after, I can't remember what, I think it might be 2023. So please do make sure to have valid passport with whatever the duration of your stay in the UK is going to be on the passport. And then everything else I think we've touched upon, but this I think is a really handy thing to either replicate for your own setups or just to keep to hand to make sure that you've ticked all of the boxes and you have all of the considerations in place when you're approaching the UK. Okay, so I guess to sum up, like I mentioned earlier, we won't know how these rules are going to work until we start getting people across borders. Obviously, we still have a little bit of time for that to happen yet. But what I do really want to encourage everybody to do is to be in touch with their unions, to be in touch with their representatives in their home countries, and to be really honest and open about any issues that they meet when they reach the UK border. Just to report those back, because all of the different musicians unions and societies are in touch and they are lobbying and working for ways to really make travel for musicians as easy and as seamless as it can possibly be. The ideal outcome would be that we get this Europe-wide musicians passport almost. But that's not going to be for a long time. We're going to have a few situations where things go wrong at the borders for us to be able to have the power to convince people to change that. So please do just feedback to whichever bodies and authorities you are in touch with. And I keep mentioning this document that I'm going to send around. I'll put that in the chat in a minute. But again, there's a huge amount of information online. There's a lot that you need to sift through and consider. So I've tried to narrow down a couple of websites that are just really clear and really easy to access. And I've also included a couple of talks that I've seen over the past month or so, so they're nice and up to date. There's one from the Publishers Association in there, which if you are working in the copyright realm, then please do pay attention to that one. And then there's just some good, useful information around touring, carnets, all of that kind of thing as well. So yeah, I think that's about it from my side.